My name is Jamie Gillies, and I'm a spokesman for the Free to Disagree campaign. I just wanted to bring you up to speed on something I saw in the press this week, which I found to be very instructive on the hate crime bill. Basically, it's a letter from a group called Atheist Scotland, from the convener of the group, Ian Stewart, to the Courier newspaper in Dundee. And it talks about why he supports the hate crime bill and what he'd like to see done under the bill. I'm just going to read the letter to you now, and then we can get into why it's instructive and why it's relevant to our campaign. The letter says, "Sir, atheists see some merit in the Justice Secretary Humza Yousaf's hate crime bill, as it will enable the prosecution of all Scotland's religions and their holy books for spreading hatred. It is utterly unacceptable that in progressive social democratic Scotland, squalid Bronze Age village disputes, as described in the holy books, about control of women, goats, or water, should give Scotland's holy willies authority to spout out vitriol against atheists, agnostics, apostates, skeptics, non-believers, women, trans people, and homosexuals. We fully intend to monitor all holy books, sermons in places of worship, and the social media accounts of the various religions, and report any hatred to Police Scotland for criminal investigation." Now, when I first saw this, I thought this must be sarcasm because it's very, very strong. But having looked into Ian Stewart's background a little bit, it does seem that it's legitimate. He's made other, he's written other letters to newspapers on religion, which are equally, let's say, strong. And the letter is both instructive and ironic. It's instructive because it shows exactly what we've been warning from the very start at Free to Disagree. We've been saying that if the hate crime bill goes ahead, if the stirring up of hatred offences come into force as they are currently drafted, the law could be misused by people who merely want to shut down debate by their opponents. So many groups, political activists, members of the public are aware that you can make malicious reports about people who say stuff that you don't like and try to shut them down and shut down their free speech that way. And that's something that's possible under the hate crime bill. Let's not forget that at present, police in Scotland record something called hate incidents. So that's an incident which is not a crime, but where somebody thinks that a hate incident has been committed, some kind of hateful speech or behaviour towards another person in a protected group. And essentially, people can phone up and report this hate incident, and with no questions asked, the police will record this hate incident and feed it into a database. Now, the one positive, I suppose, with this framework at present of hate incidents and hate incident recording is that it won't lead to criminal prosecutions usually. So the police will record the incident and it's accessible in figures which people point to, but you're not going to get taken to court. However, with the hate crime bill, we're talking about changes to criminal legislation, new criminal legislation, new stirring up of hatred offences. So if somebody were to decide to report somebody for stirring up hatred, that would result in a police investigation, potentially prosecution and conviction for an offence with a maximum sentence of 7 years in prison or an unlimited fine or both. So this really raises the bar. If the law was to go through in its current state and people were to use this to try and score political points and shut down their opponents, we're talking about people potentially being prosecuted, and that's something which is very serious indeed. So that's why the letter is instructive. The letter is also ironic because it's very strong and pretty nasty about people of religion. I mean, it describes religious people as holy willies, whatever that means, and insults their religious texts and basically threatens to report them. So it's likely that this letter would in itself constitute a stirring up of hatred offence if it was reported by somebody from a church or a mosque, somebody who's religious and who's offended by that. So Ian Stewart himself, in his attempt to shut down religious people, could end up being shut down by religious people. Now, we don't want to live in a society in Scotland. I certainly don't want to live in a society in Scotland where the law allows people to punish one another and to shut each other down. The police in Scotland have been pretty outspoken about the capacity that this legislation has to result in vexatious reports by members of the public. And the Scottish Police Federation has said that it is not the police's place to police people's private disputes and arguments and to decide which speech is legitimate and which thoughts are legitimate in Scottish society. You know, that's pretty Orwellian and chilling and something that should not be part of a free society. So due to all of the concerns that I've described about malicious reporting and the wider concerns that we have about the legislation, which could criminalise merely offensive speech and controversial debate because abusive, that is rude or insulting language, will be criminalised, we are calling on the Scottish Government to scrap Part 2 of the bill. Now, we're doing that for two reasons. One, because of the concerns we have, which I've just talked about, and two, because it's not evident that the hate crime proposals that Mr. Youssef has presented will actually help victims of hate crime. The government says in the financial memorandum accompanying the bill that the conduct they describe under the legislation and under Part 2 of the bill would already be covered by existing provisions. So if the stirring up of hatred offences are not going to provide additional help and protection to people in the groups that they describe, why are they necessary, especially given all the risks to free speech and the public uproar? If the government wants to maintain public confidence and support for its policies, if it wants to avoid, a continuing public backlash and a backlash by numerous organisations and professionals in Scottish life, it should ditch Part 2 of the bill. They've done this before with other controversial legislation. They've parked it or decided to withdraw it. That would be highly commendable. And Humza Yousaf might feel like that would be a defeat or a humiliation to climb down or do a U-turn and to change course. But we wouldn't think that at all. We wouldn't present it like that. It would be humility. It would be listening to your constituents and to expert groups and admitting that your approach is wrong and admitting that it was misguided and saying that you're going to put it right. That would be highly commended. And so we just appeal to Humza Yousaf directly and to Nicola Sturgeon, who made comments this week, and the government, and also to other MSPs of every party. Please ensure that Part 2 of this legislation is withdrawn. It's very problematic. It's very threatening to free speech. It's hard to see how it could be amended because the concepts that you're dealing with in this legislation are so complicated. So the best thing to do is to go back to the drawing board. What we've said previously is that the bill as a whole contains many non-controversial elements. So the consolidation of existing law and the addition of a new aggravated offence on age, these things in the hate crime bill have not caused controversy. So if the government was to withdraw Part 2 of the legislation, it would win broad support for the legislation and other parts of the legislation from the other parties in the Scottish Parliament and from the public. So we think this is the solution. We're going to continue to call on the government to do that. And we'd urge you, as members of the Scottish public who are represented by your MSPs, to write to your MSPs to express your concerns, to make it clear that you're not happy with this legislation. And let's not forget that MSPs will take note. If they receive 10 letters, 10 communications, 20, 30 from constituents who are not happy about the hate crime bill, any pragmatic, right-thinking politician is going to realise that backing legislation which is unpopular with their constituents is not going to do them any favours at the next election, for example. MSPs are open to listening to constituents' concerns. That's their job, to represent the people. So please write to your MSPs, write to newspapers, phone up radio phone-in shows, make your views heard, and continue to support Free to Disagree if you possibly can, and to share our content. We're confident that the government is going to have to bow to pressure at some point and sort out this legislation.